Okay, good.
All right. Well, I have 9 o'clock.
Good. Hang on 1 second. We'll start recording.
But the breakout's recording.
We're now live on
Good morning.
YouTube.
All right, how are you?
We're now live on YouTube. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday, July 12th. This is the CVTA Personnel Committee. So first off, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank everyone for being here early on a Monday morning. Kenova and I are talking that this is unique for us, at least for the last couple of years. Also, Ms. Page, thank you for cutting your trip short and coming back and accommodating us. Thanks everybody for getting together quickly. We've been charged with doing a lot of work in a little amount of time, so I appreciate everybody's help with that. It looks like we do have a quorum, so we will go ahead and get started. Mr. Carroll, thank you for joining us, be it remotely. Wanted to over to Mr. Gregory, and he's going to talk a little bit about the charge that has been put in front of us.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
I was wondering if Mr. Gregory might quickly talk about the virtual circumstances and the emergency declaration that's still in effect.
Okay, sure. The emergency declaration is still in effect, though to a lesser degree. So we're conducting this meeting sort of in a hybrid format. Most of the committee members are present here today. Mr. Carroll is participating remotely via Zoom, and the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. So if there are public comments, I believe they can submit them through the app or through their YouTube, or is that right? Or
There's also an
a
email
comment.
address.
Okay, and then there's the email address that's posted online, of course, as normal. And there aren't any members of the public here present, but the doors are open, and the public is welcome to attend. And the meeting was posted in the usual manner, so it has been properly advertised and noticed. So here we are.
Great. Okay.
You want me to move on to the charge of the committee, Mr.
That would be
Chairman?
great.
Okay, so at the May 28th, 2021 meeting of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, the Authority Board unanimously approved a motion to create this ad hoc personnel committee to study and report back to the full authority concerning staffing needs to support the authority. The motion directed the chairman of the CVTA, Mr. Thornton, to appoint members of the authority, and he did so. At the June 25th meeting, those members are Neil Spoonhauer, appointed as chairman, Kevin Carroll, Patricia Page, LeVar Stoney, and Kenova Peterson. Following the appointment of the committee members, Mr. Thornton, Chairman Thornton, directed the committee to schedule their first meeting in July, which is where we are here, the first meeting, and further directed, let's see here, the committee to report back to the authority in September with its recommendations concerning the staffing needs of the authority. And the charge document is in the agenda packet, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Thank you.
So plainly speaking, we've got this new authority that was set up by the General Assembly that's been launched and functioning, and we've sort of been muscling our way through, maybe rather than finessing our way through. So we want to get to where we are staffed correctly and appropriately. I thought it'd be good for us to start the discussion with Mr. Parsons and Ms. Heater talking about the current state of affairs organizationally, how it is set up now, because I do believe in talking with some folks that there may be confusion on who's the director, is there a director, what is the role of Plan RVA. So I would appreciate if you guys could kind of just let us know how things are operating today, and then we can talk about moving forward how we can get to the right staffing model.
Yes, sir. I could start. I think we could talk about how we're doing business on a day-to-day basis, and then possibly talk about our peers in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads as comparative models. So right now, Plan RVA has a staff of 24, 25, and about 12 of us are transportation staff. We are performing the functions that are required of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization. which includes many federal requirements like the Long Range Transportation Plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, and many other components that the MPOs around the country are set up to do. When the authority was created last August, and I guess even a few months before then, the Plan RVA and the TPO took added responsibility to serve as staff for that organization, for the authority, and have picked up the additional administrative and operating types of responsibilities, working with the authority, with the standing committees, and with the public to make sure that the authority is stood up and is on a good foundation for working in the future. We are obviously committed to making sure the authority is successful, and many of the same goals that Plan RVA has are shared by the authority. So there is some redundancy in the work that we're doing. But at this point, there is also added responsibility and expectations of staff that go above and beyond what our roles traditionally have been.
Okay.
I think that there are, a few staff members, myself and Ms. Mueller included, as well as Ms. Heater, are doing significantly more work for the authority at this point, and gladly doing it. But that definition of the roles and what the needs are for long-term staffing, I think is part of what we're here for today, to try and iron that out. So I think that's the foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Plan RVA, under the agreement that was approved last year, the memorandum of agreement, and then that was approved for this current fiscal year, is really geared toward fulfilling what I'll say the minimum requirements of the CVTA to launch last year. So what did we need to do to fulfill those initial requirements of the legislation, get the authority structure up and running, and move it forward as effectively as possible. In this coming fiscal year, similar kind of vein, I think, of spirit and tone of that MOU, we don't play the role of, like an executive leadership insofar as really being able to facilitate the authority in its envisioning process. Who do you want to be? How do you want to function? And obviously we're approaching a stage in the game where I think that's important to consider. Are you self-organizing? Are you kind of self-guiding that discussion about how you will operate, 20 years from now, or not? So I think that's an important distinction to make. Largely the role that Plan RVA and our staff has been playing, I think, has been a valuable role, certainly, but it's been mostly focused on meeting those minimum requirements, moving the ball forward, so to speak. But we are aware that, and I think Mr. Parsons spoke to this, and we didn't increase our staff capacity to take this new work on. And so we are aware that some members of the authority feel like we could be going faster with more dedicated resources. So,
if I could ask a question, but this goes back to that. Obviously, you and Nicole have taken on additional duties with CVTA. Has this been at the expense of any of your duties with the TPO, or in other words, are you putting in a lot of overtime to do this, or is this within? If you weren't doing CVTA, would you have blank space in your timesheets?
We would not have blank space in our timesheets.
or other projects being neglected because of CVTA?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so
I think
they're putting in a lot of overtime.
Okay, well, this is where I'm trying to get to, as to whether, if this was, you're doing more work, but you're still working within just regular hours, then that would be a different ballgame versus what you're doing. So that's, and that affects our staffing.
And so just as important to me, are you being compensated for the additional, other than, I think we have salary employees, so is it, I know they have a budget for CVTA, so my question becomes, are our staff being compensated, financially compensated for that?
No, ma'am.
Our staff members that are assigned to the CVTA did receive a modest service recognition earlier this last fiscal year, and did receive the same salary increases that were approved by the Plan RVA board for the new fiscal year.
Okay, so in both cases, you're salaried employees, you're not.
That's correct. You know,
Okay.
typically in local government, when a new project comes in or a new responsibility comes in, you know, we don't operate like a consulting company where we bill differently to different projects, or you know, this was the work that was assigned to the agency, and so we absorbed that into the workload of the agency.
But did we not approve, or have we not approved the hiring of additional personnel to take the load off?
We did. You did.
Plan RVA.
Last fall, the Planning District Commission board approved the creation of a new position that would be for board support. So largely that would alleviate the load that Nicole's carrying right now. We did hire, we had somebody on staff for a very brief amount of time who departed the position because they did not feel like they could fulfill the expectations of the position. At that point in time, we were rounding the bend for the new fiscal year discussions, and decided to see what would happen with regard to this agreement. And so the Plan RVA board, so the staffing stayed in place, Mr. Parsons, Ms. Mueller, myself, pulling in other staff members as needed. And so then we did get approval to be able to recruit a new position for this fiscal year that is full-time. The position last year was part-time. And we are ready to go with recruiting that position so that we can transition Nicole into a planning position here in the organization and be able to, you know, backfill essentially the functions that she's fulfilling right now with a new recruit.
Let me ask you a question this here. When we talk about how these are functioning from an accounting perspective, there's 3 different budgets. Is that correct? Plan RVA, RTPO, and CVTA. They have. So my question is that does that role that you're speaking of, does that roll up under CVTA or under Plan RVA?
The new position?
Yes.
It's split. So
Okay.
the time that person would spend, they would allocate, you know, record their time spent on the TPO, just as Nicole does now, or Chet or myself. So time spent on the CVTA gets billed through to the CVTA. Time spent on the TPO gets billed through to those grant funding programs.
Okay.
One more distinction. I think when the authority was started a year ago, there was I guess, for lack of a better word, an assumption that I would be as like an interim executive director. And I think as time has gone by, I think we've realized that it's more of an administrator role. As Martha mentioned, we're not out in front, you know, to do visioning and what is best for the authority in future years, just because of all of the administrative work that's needed to take place this year. So I think if there's anything that may be identified as lacking in the current arrangement, it's that there isn't that visioning leadership in place at this point.
Let me ask another question about roles. So we talk about the TAC, and it seems like there's a lot of overlap there as well. So can you speak to that a little bit as far as, is it the same? It's very blurry to me. Is there a CVTA TAC and an RTPO TAC? And are they the exact same people, or are they different?
Yes, great question. There are 2 different technical committees. So the TPO TAC has been a longstanding body that's served as basically the go-to group for the TPO. All technical issues, many of the operating questions go through the TAC. The idea was that the CVTA would have a similar group, and there is a lot of overlap in terms of staff members, not local staff members that serve on that technical committee. So I believe the same person from Goochland that serves on the TPO TAC serves on the CVTA TAC, as well as many of the other member jurisdictions, same as Hanover and New Kent as well. So there is some overlap, but the responsibilities of the TAC for the CVTA are a little different because of the directed nature of the authority and its focus on financing transportation improvements. So there are a number of things that are highlighted in the legislation, like establishment of regional priorities, discussion of eligibility for projects in terms of what can be funded, what can't be funded with the different pots of money. Overseeing the development of an annual, not work program, but an annual spending plan for the authority in terms of what the plans are for the 50% local funds. Those all go through the CVTA TAC specifically. There's no RTPO component of that. I think the overlap and the good thing about having similar staff members on both TACs is that as there's a life cycle. So the TPO is a planning organization, and as the TPO develops their priorities and the long-range transportation plan, many of those processes that the TPO is developing on a regular basis feed naturally into the considerations that the CVTA has to make in terms of establishing those regional priorities and moving forward.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have other questions for Mr. Parsons or Ms. Heater?
May I just,
yeah,
sorry, add one more thing. I mean, I think an important part of the staff discussion is that, we've talked a little bit about the role that Plan RVA is playing, but you do have two other sort of staff support agreements. The CVTA has an MOA, forget which is a fiscal agent agreement with Chesterfield County. So there are additional personnel that are seated within both Chesterfield County and Richmond that support this organization. So from a financial management perspective, that's essentially, you could think about it outsourced beyond our organization and managed by Chesterfield County and their finance department. Debbie Basie is the primary person on that in tracking the inflows and outflows of revenue and providing the financial statements every month. And then the City of Richmond also, Sheila White is the primary in the finance department there in reviewing and overseeing the audit process. So, especially when you talk about the order of magnitude of funds flowing through the CVTA, those are pretty critical functions that right now are sourced through those arrangements, but definitely I think are a critical component of the organization.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Offer some comments. It's not really a question, but I have some serious concern that we're, CVTA, we're a financing organization. TPO is the planning. And I want to be careful not to divorce the two. I think they're too much hand in hand, and we don't, and you mentioned the word redundancy, and we could be very easily get into a redundant situation if we're trying to work from both sides without having some a good coordination. I also have a lot of appreciation for what Plan RVA and Chet through Plan RVA have been able to do for us for this past year. And I don't want to put Plan RVA in the lurch, so to speak, that I know there's been discussion, hey, we want to put somebody on mid-year. Well, we got a MOU for a year. And to ask somebody to sit here and switch gears in midstream based on, all right, we put somebody in and change all the rules in the middle of the year is not fair to Plan RVA either. And I think it's probably rushing too far, but I think we do need to get in a situation where we know where we're going by mid-year giving time for Plan RVA to adjust one way or the other as to where we're going. But I don't see us wanting to have a divorce into a separate agency. I think there's too much overlap in what we're doing not to have a good coordinated effort.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Mr. Carroll, it looks like you're under interrogation under that lamp there.
Well, I stayed in the Holiday Inn Express last night, but I don't think it's going to make me any, wiser this morning. I agree with Tobin that I think that whatever we do moving forward, I think it's going to be an integral part to make sure that we keep Plan RVA involved. And I guess if we do look at, as an example, additional staff or an executive director position, we also need to look at how we can integrate that in. And, because what I don't want to do is turn around and have to fund another office for a very small staff. And so it may be, we may have to, I know we're looking for a new space, or whether or not we retain the space where Plan RVA is now, and in the future, when we look at that space, we might be able to also look at some additional space that if we do hire CVTA staff, it could be a shared office space. So I think those are all considerations we need to look at, moving forward.
Gotcha. Yes, that's kind of a good segue, Mr. Carroll. I think it would be helpful for us to, I'm a big, what problems are we solving today? So what questions do we as a committee need to address? We obviously have our charge of addressing the staffing, but what are the big questions that we feel we need to answer to be able to come up with a recommendation in September? I think if we know those questions, then we could strategize on, okay, now how do we get to the answers to those questions?
Well, I think Chet has given us a good thing, as he pointed out.
Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me now?
attorneys have some shutdown time, you know. And so I just think that we need to think about that. We need to think about if we got to go back and think Plan RVA and what's our staffing for that, and what can we do to gear up staffing or to assist in staffing for CVTA, then fine. But I mean, right now we have staff members that work in excellence, and a lot of times added hours, and we don't know what's going to be coming down the pipe with either one, with the infrastructure plan or i.e. with CVTA,
Right.
and how time consuming that's going to be. And so I think that we should show that kind of appreciation to our staff members that have taken on the role and the task.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even for Martha, I mean, you manage a staff for yet another organization.
Well, so I think that's the most critical charge, is identifying the roles and responsibilities for the CVTA. And with that, the question does become, does this committee need to answer or seek an answer to, are we going to continue with the with Chesterfield and Richmond's support? Are we going to go forward with that model, or are we looking to bring those functions in-house? Is that a question? So I'm not asking for the answer to the question. I'm asking, should that be a question that we're asking for this committee?
I think we should go forward with what we're doing for a while at this point. That we've got established people in those both jurisdictions that can handle this stuff without us trying to start it all over again.
So, so we're saying that is just, I'm throwing on my project manager hat now. So that decision is out of scope for this committee. We're comfortable leaving that as it is today, and we're not solving for that.
Yeah, I think there was that charge.
Well, no, I guess part of our charge is to decide what a big part of what the staffing of the CVTA is required is totally dependent on our relationship with Plan RVA. Plan RVA, we're talking about Plan RVA staff, but that's really not our position. Our position is to make a contract for services with Plan RVA, and Plan RVA has to determine how they're going to staff up to meet the agreements that they have with the CVTA. So, I mean, it is, but it's an indirect relationship. I mean, our relationship is strictly a contractual relationship with Plan RVA to provide services. Now, who and how they provide those services is really up to Martha and her staff as to who they're going to sign to. So
I agree with that.
But so if that's the case, if we're going to continue with Plan RVA to provide the services, the administrative services, then that minimizes the staff that CVTA has to have. The executive director has to coordinate these things, and would obviously need an assistant, I would think. But if you don't have Plan RVA, then you've got to start doing the stuff that they're staffing for now.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I thank you, Mr. Peterson, for those comments. I think you said something earlier about, what are the questions we need to ask? And I think that there's some sort of fundamental questions that might be helpful for the committee to undertake. One is what we've been talking about, and that sort of what's the opportunity and the cost of having such a close relationship with Plan RVA and the TPO. I think there's been very clear messaging from the beginning, at least to us, that, we don't want redundancy, we don't want inefficiencies. At the same time, I think we want high quality work. And so I think that if you almost thought of like a spectrum of, where on that spectrum is the CVTA comfortable with that alignment versus, kind of separation and autonomy. So that's almost like one kind of scale. And I don't know that there's a wrong answer, but there's certainly a right answer for you all. And so I think that that's an important, piece of the puzzle. Once that direction is set, I think that our organization, if asked to participate, can staff up appropriately. I think that there's a strong desire from management to do what Mrs. Page has indicated, but without knowing about duration and timeline, it's a little difficult to put all the pieces together. I think the other sort of fundamental question that's important to talk through in this is, again, sort of on that efficiency scale, how aligned do you want to be with other regional organizations and other localities, staff capacities? Because there is inherent in that, it's not impossible. I think it's quite doable, and the last year has demonstrated a lot of positive outcomes from that, but it is more complicated. And so, there is not, as Mr. Parsons said, a point person for the CVTA right now. It's a little bit of a, well, if it's this person. If it's this person. And so, that complex structure is a really nice leverage of resources, but it's not necessarily probably where I think any of us, at least at the staff level, want to see things go in the future. So I think about things sort of like where on the continuum of separation, agency autonomy between Plan RVA, the TPO, and the CBTA do you want to be? And where on sort of the spectrum of cost efficiency? There's lots of ways that our organization wouldn't have to be involved at all in staffing, but we could still have an MOU to locate together. So I think it's sort of critical to understand, where do you want to achieve those cost savings and how deep do you want to go in co-location? So it could just simply be that we're roommates.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily need to embed the staffing to accomplish real estate savings. So I think that those are kind of the things to think about in this, and I don't know that it necessarily has to be an all or one.
So I feel like there's sort of underlying things being said that we're touching on, which is there are models that exist today that we need to review. So is that a takeaway for, and how can we do that?
I think that this touches on what you implied in the opening was who do we want to be when we grow up?
Right.
And looking at the other authorities in the state is a starting point. It brings into question the concept of leveraging and where does the CVTA fall on that spectrum? Because if it's a Hampton Roads model that the CVTA would like to follow, which is a lot more regional funding focused, big, huge projects, leveraging dollars through the bond market, the capacity would need to be added for us to specialize in that. So that's a direct staffing question.
Okay.
If it's more locally focused and making sure that it's dollars are available as projects are identified on the regional priority list, that might be accomplished with different type of a staffing structure.
So for our charge, is there a way to present the full body with those options to outline and to say, okay, if we decide to be pay as you go, I think that was the term that was used, we could employ this model. If we are bonds, then we're this model, and C, there's a hybrid. Is that something we can pull together and be able to? So how do we get to understand? I'm thinking more tactically. Like, are the people that come talk to us? Do you guys know that information? Like, how do we get to learn what those models look like?
I mean, I think our arrangement with Chesterfield would be the starting point for that in terms of financial services and their understanding. Would that be enough?
Well, I think, a couple things. I think the Chesterfield and the city team on the finance part, that's the finance team on the kind of the spectrum of PAYGO versus bond financing. So they're going to be able to tell you like how to keep the wheels running on the financial part of that. That's how the structure of the CVTA is currently. Concurrent with that, though, the finance committee has an effort underway. There's an RFP due to solicit financial services. So, I think we can call in Mr. Page and Ms. Bachman again to talk to us. I think you want to be careful asking them, how does your structure work? Not what do you think we should do?
I could,
Right.
Mr. Chair.
Good, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If I could add, you know, the services that currently that Chesterfield are providing, part of what we did, we brought Matt Harris into the finance committee and gave a briefing. I think Mr. Peterson will remember this, of what it could look like at different options, bonding or pay-as-you-go, or a full utilization of all the monies for bonding, or 50%. And that's a discussion that, you know, needs to be brought forward to the full committee for consideration, so that, which, you know, I certainly have my own thoughts on it, but the rest of the committee needs to have that same briefing, because that is going to be relevant as to what duties and responsibilities we're going to need to staff for. And so moving forward, that is going to be something to look at. I think that when you look at the Hampton Roads model, that they've leveraged the $200 million that they get annually to almost $6 billion in projects. I think one of the things we're definitely going to have to look at, quite frankly, for regional is bonding. But my personal preference would be for us to do a model which would incorporate both pay-as-you-go funds, reserve funds, and bonding. That being said, I think it's important to understand that because that's whoever, if we look at hiring someone to be an executive director and other staff, those are the things they're going to have to manage, just like the other two organizations are doing. So I just wanted to bring that up. And again, that you brought that up as an important thing to understand. You know, you need to know what the workload is of what the individuals are going to actually be doing.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Chet, Hampton Roads, what percentage of their funding goes back directly to the individual jurisdictions? I don't believe any is it.
It's 100% regional.
100% regional. How about Northern Virginia?
I believe it's 30%.
30%. So we're very high on the local side. So
yes,
we got to realize that our CVTA leadership primarily is dealing with 35% of the funds we bring. 15% is automatically off the top to GRTC, 50% to the local. But that's still significant funding. And how that's used, and I agree with Mr. Carroll on this, is that we're sitting there, we need to leverage to be able to get some of our projects done. We leverage that with bonds, and we can use that as additional funding with smart scale and different things to bring projects, make them viable that are not viable now. But that takes some good, strong leadership with some help. Nobody can do it individually without some assistance. But setting those priorities, though, is still the TPOs, really, not the CVTAs, as to identifying the projects. So the cooperation is still important. But I think we do need to be looking at staffing CVTA, and staffing it, but at the same time, not forgetting to utilize contractual relationships where we can to minimize the staffing. And I think we get to identify an executive director has to be somebody who can coordinate all these things that are going on with both Plan RVA, TPO, our financial advisors that we're looking to pick up. And at some point in time, I do suspect that the city and Chesterfield's MOUs with us will disappear for direct CVTA involvement. But I don't see that as being an immediate issue.
So we're at this about 45 minutes now. And I think we've identified that we have to solve a staffing problem. What I'm not hearing is what are our steps to solve that problem? How do we get to the plan?
Well, let me ask a question about the desire of the committee. Would you like staff
at Plan RBA to work with staff on the TAC and TAC staff on the finance working group and the Regional Human Resources Roundtable to come up with that description of duties of an executive director, a lead staff administrator, I mean, sort of that executive function responsibility, and any other support services that we identify that might be appropriately assigned to multiple personnel. And then come back to you with that description where you start to determine what needs to be an independently hired individual and where should that person sit, what can be contracted through arrangements with entities in the region. I mean, do you want to start to sort of get your arms around the duties, functions and responsibilities, and then start to look, you know, analytically at, or do you want to be in the weeds of the description of the responsibilities and functions?
Mr.
And
Chair.
when she's saying, she means
I mean,
the
the
committee. She doesn't mean Neil.
I think
No,
for us,
In that case,
It's not-
it changes. If it's you, that's fine.
Mr. Chair.
I
Yeah.
would like
Go
to,
ahead, Ms. Vicky.
go ahead. Okay.
Holiday Inn.
I agree with what you just said. I think that I think we should probably put that task on staff to come up with, working with the HR roundtable on coming up with what specific duties we think the CVTA is going to have to manage. And then we can figure out what those specific duties need to be assigned to which personnel. And to add on to what Mr. Peterson said, it's not just the 35%, because the 15% that actually goes to GRTC, the CVTA also has authority over GRTC on how that money is spent. So when they come forward to us with a plan, we have to approve it. There is some level of management that's going to need to take place in a leadership position who would answer back to the CVTA on, you know, what that would look like in relation to GRTC. So it's not just the 35%, it's also that 15% that's going to be dealing with our regional transportation RTC. But I think putting staff in a position to start looking at those, what a specific position would end up requiring, or even more than one position would require in order to meet the mission.
Thank you. Ms. Vicky.
I have to agree with Martha, and the reason being, do you all have a clue? I mean, I don't have a clue of all the tasks that Chet and Nicole and Martha are doing. I don't have a clue. I just come to the meeting, everything's set up, all my minutes look good, I'm cool. You know, but I don't know, you know, all of the duties and responsibilities and the tasks and the time that it takes to do all of this. I mean, and so I think that I think it's better that staff gives us the descriptions and the duties and responsibilities, and then, you know, we can work together to work together in a framework of then what will be needed or how this, and that's whether Plan RBA stays in place as it is or we go outside of Plan RBA. We still have to have that information, and they're our experts at it because they're doing it. And I'm not alone, and I don't know what they're not what they're doing and not doing. Yeah.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I think there's a missing component maybe in chat that kind of reacted to your reaction of, okay, we're already overstaffed or understaffed. But I do believe that I'm wondering if staff wonders if there's questions that we have to answer for them to be able to do this task. Like you said, like
if it's okay with this committee, I mean, I think the solution that Martha suggested is a good one. If we can come up with multiple options, your point earlier,
yes,
depending on what the authority decides to do in terms of leveraging and how the finance model is, could probably present multiple staffing options.
Okay.
You could come up with multiple options, or you could look at the worst case. You know, if we get into financing, what's the most complex staffing solution? and then we can work backwards from there.
Okay.
I think there's multiple ways to look at it. The other arm of that is if Plan RVA stays in the mix, what does that agreement look like? We've kind of talked a little bit about it. We can't operate on an annual agreement and hire full-time staff and be responsible to the authority and the staff as well. So that would probably come into the discussion at some point.
I'm not sure I followed the last point.
If we're under
I do.
a renewing
Good for you.
a renewing annual agreement with the authority
Yeah.
for Plan RVA to provide staff support,
Right.
it's hard to go out and hire full-time staff that could go away in 9 months if the agreement isn't renewed.
I see what you're saying.
So would it be a long-term, would the agreement be a longer term, i.e. 5 years, i.e. 10 years, something
Well,
like that?
Well, we're sort of doing that right now in that so much of the work is grant-based. And those grants go away, so do the personnel
Right.
that we have right. That is the way we're working now. It's not unusual, but it would certainly be easier if it was a longer-term commitment.
But I almost see this. I'm a visual person, so I almost see sort of a straw man org chart in different scenarios of, okay, if you go this run, here are the roles you're going to need, and we don't even have to put names in the boxes. It's just the titles, and this box could be filled by Plan RVA or it doesn't have to be. But to get to that level, I think would be just to get to that point. I think it would be super helpful.
Mhm.
So what do you all need to make that happen? Besides for extra people.
If I may,
Sure, go ahead.
I think I've heard everybody of the four of us here. I think we're all in agreement that we're going to need an executive director for CVTA and some level of support staff to do whatever we determine those needs are. And I like the idea of letting our HR, the round table, and the tax help us determine those what's down in the weeds. But I think that up front is one. The scenario is we continue to work with Plan RVA, or we have to staff to do what Plan RVA is already doing for us, which Plan RVA can give us data on that, in addition to our executive director. I guess I have a question. If we say, okay, go help us with this and give us your recommendations, how long is that going to take?
So I think, because I'm not just speaking on my own time frame, but, we're talking about involving a lot of people. I think we are, likely need to plan to have a couple of meetings of this committee before the September authority meeting. And we need to make our timeline work to your timeline. My suggestion would be that, and my apologies that I don't know the answer to this, but what does it take to activate the Human Resources Roundtable? Is that something that happens at the direction, I presume, of your local government administrators? And then Mr. Peterson, do you recall, do they then sort of self-select who has bandwidth to be able to kind of take the lead on that?
Well, I know Janet Lawson would be more than happy to help with this, and with the Hanover County to support working with this.
So wait, I'm
That's
confused.
our HR.
Right. Does the HR roundtable actually exist?
Yeah, it hasn't met since before the pandemic.
Okay.
But, we used to convene the HR roundtable twice a year, just for them to be able to have a space to talk with colleagues and talk through different things. And so each of the 9 HR departments, and then they've, as has been mentioned numerous times, they've taken the lead on kind of key recruitment processes in the past. My recruitment process, for example, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I think my suggestion would be that I think we could put together sort of that straw man list internally of that documentation of kind of functions and responsibilities. I think we could circulate that with both the finance work group and the technical advisory committee to get their kind of customer perspective, if you will. And then I think that we could turn that over. In my mind, it would be nice to turn that over to the HR roundtable for the HR experts to help us package that in a way that looks like that position description kind of thing. And so, you know, from a timeline perspective, you know, I think we could probably get that done in a month.
Okay, I'm asking that for the very simple reason is in our charge, we were charged to bring our recommendations back in September. I'm not too sure we shouldn't ask for that. It's
I think it should be
extended to
extended.
October to give us time to do it right. I'm not too sure September isn't too fast to get everything in place. And we could ask that Friday, to extend that.
Mr. Chair,
Because
Sir?
I spoke with my HR department the other day. They're ready to assist in any way on assist with this through the HR roundtable, just, you know.
Thank you. I actually also got a call from Henrico from John Patolkas called me and offered up their HR resources as well. So we have handovers too. So do we know how to actually activate, to Martha's actual question? Like, is there,
It's like the Avengers.
is there a bat signal or something we send up? Like,
Well, I can, I mean,
You know,
we
they
can
have an
convene them. I think
Okay.
I mean, just to be frank, everybody is over. I mean, I don't think that any of the HR departments. So I think it takes the committee members speaking to their administrators and making sure that this is conveyed as not a nice to do, but as a priority, right? I mean, it always helps, quite candidly, when our local government partners understand that this is a directive coming from our shared bosses, the elected officials, and they, otherwise it's another request that I'm sure is one of many in their email inbox.
Well, Lieutenant will be committed to be a part of it.
okay. So your ask is that we go back sort of to give air cover and lean in and let them know this is important. But you will go do the reaching out and doing the organizing of getting them together.
I'm picking their brains.
Yeah, I think probably what we'll do with Mr. Carroll's permission probably is just reach out to Ms. Martin Selby and start there. And then, you know, it always works better to have a colleague reach out, and then we can make sure that all 9 HR departments are included in a convening. And then, as I understand the process has gone in the past, each department has volunteered what they think they can best contribute to the process. That's worked out quite well in the past, I think.
Okay.
She's just waiting for your call.
Okay.
All right. So let me see if I captured this right for the update. Right. So this committee, we met today. What's going to happen is staff is going to create straw man or come to us with recommendations of organizational structure without names and boxes of, you know, one case, you know, either worst case or, you know, different, a couple models for us to react to. That will then go to the finance committee, you said, and then and TAC. What you said?
Well,
Finance roundtable, not finance CVTA.
Finance.
yeah, finance working group. That's just because of how it's
That's fine.
worded in the charge.
All right, so to the finance working group, and then to the HR roundtable.
Yeah, I
Action.
envision the HR roundtable to be involve the whole.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
But I think the TAC and the finance working group can be helpful to get that list, the comprehensive list of duties and functions, and then we can reach out to each of the 9 HR directors to tell me what they
Okay.
probably to validate that process makes sense, frankly.
Okay.
Mr.
And then,
Chair,
so then other, yes, Mr. Carroll.
something also to add to what the HR roundtable should also look at or could look at is also the possibility that the executive director's position could also be contracted services as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to, again, this is why we look at different options here. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a person that's directly an employee of the CVTA, but it could be a contracted services similar to an MOU that we have with other organizations. Just again, it's just an addition to add to what we look at from a model standpoint. It may be best to hire someone who's a direct hire, or it may be better to do a contract. I think it's something that we need to make sure we explore all options when we look at it.
Right, and I think that goes to my point of we're drawing the boxes of what the rules are, but the decision on how those roles get filled is what we're gonna have to decide. Other than giving the air cover for the HR groups, what else do you folks need to move forward?
I think timeline, what time frame, I get that that's a give and take, but what time frame, how frequently does this committee want to get together to see useful information back? I mean, I don't think that we should have staff just going off and you don't hear from us for 4 or 6 weeks.
No, absolutely.
I think that goes to Mr. Peterson's point about Friday.
I think it's very important that the full CVTA is able to just make a decision on the direction we're going to take by the end of this calendar year, with understanding that the MOU goes through the fiscal year. And that gives plenty of time for everybody to reorganize, if necessary, reorganize. But I think that we got to back up from the end of this calendar year and make sure we get everything in place and get done with time for the full CVTA to be able to consider this and make a decision by the end of December.
And I'm sorry, I would just add, really, do you mean the last CVTA meeting of the calendar year?
Calendar, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, by the last CV. We need to have this by October, but I don't think we could possibly have it by September. And as a full recommendation. But October will give us time to take it to the October meeting of the CVTA and then have an intervening meeting before we make a final decision as to where we're going to go with staff.
Is the September CBT meeting the 24th?
That's the proposed date, yes.
That's it's 2.5 months away.
It's a lot of people, a lot of different groups to get together, and for us to have time to consider it after it comes back to us.
Okay, fair enough. To your point, Ms. Here, I feel like once you guys get into some of the work, there's going to be a need for you to come back to maybe answer questions. So we're doing this a lot to you all today. So you tell us what is a good time frame for you to get in front of us again, and
I would think that the first chunk of work is for us to work on a draft of the structure and take it through finance working group and tech.
Okay.
And get their feedback, and then maybe get back together to talk about findings.
So maybe
and make sure we're on the same page.
3rd week of August. How long? That's 5 weeks away.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yes.
technical advisory, if I may, just to sort of anchor around some dates. Technical advisory committee in August would be August 9th. So do you envision it being an agenda item, Chad, or more of just a circulation?
I think it could be an agenda item.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
August 9th would be when the TAC could.
So yes, I mean, finance working group doesn't have a regular meeting.
Okay.
We could look at the 3rd week in August.
Okay. Do we want to try to schedule it now, or do we want to?
What's the date?
Let's not do Monday morning meeting.
The week of August 16th.
The week of August 16th.
If we could maybe we could just circulate some options,
Yeah.
and then we could circulate that to the mayor's office as well to try to make sure.
Okay.
So we have options from you all that work.
Just see.
First of all, that week, the last 2 days of that week are taken up by VACO. Is the county official summit. It's taking place.
August?
So, yeah, August 19th and 20th. And that'll be here in Richmond, but so it really puts us in the first part of the week, because I'm sure a number of us are going to be involved in the Waco Summit.
So I've got something that Tuesday morning. How about the 18th?
Works for me. Or
If we can do it virtual, because I'm going to be out of town for that whole week.
I'm fine with virtual. Okay, so we'll pencil in the 18th. Does 9 o'clock work?
well, I guess we still have to have it here.
Right.
He's got a reason to be able to participate virtually, but I guess with the city's rules, you can.
Yes,
Mhm.
we can do that.
Yeah, I'll be here.
But so we still have to have it in person, but with a virtual,
We're virtual option, right?
not a virtual meeting.
So we'll tentatively, we'll have to talk to the mayor's office, but tentatively the morning of the 18th.
All right, this afternoon is Tuesday if we needed to, if that works for, I don't know if that works for you.
It does.
Okay.
So we'll say the 18th, and
I
then
hate to
Martha, can
say
you
it.
help us get a
I hate
time?
to say Monday, but again.
All right.
For the 18th in the morning or in the evening?
I think we're gonna check with the mayor's office to see if we can
I
accommodate
can do the 18th in the morning.
18th in the morning. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll block it off right now, just to make sure.
I got a meeting at 3 o'clock.
So we will circulate the list of responsibilities, duties, and functions to the finance director's working group, probably frankly, with emphasis on Chesterfield and Richmond, since they're a piece of this arrangement, and to the TAC. The TAC will have this as part of an agenda item in the August meeting. Work to circle back with you all the week of the 16th for that meeting. We'll get the date nailed down, and then that would enable us to have kind of next steps identified as we approach that September meeting. But in the meantime, it sounds like the committee is probably going to make a preliminary report on Friday and make sure that the full authority is aware and engaged in the direction that the committee is going.
Yeah.
Do you want staff to help provide any details for you?
No. Let me get up a second. Story of my life. All right, anything else, everyone? All right, then I move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr.
Kim,
Carroll.
Friday.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
This is page